Welcome to Pure Hustle Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're on episode 435.
Jeez, 435 episodes. That's pretty wild. That's like, if we did an episode every day of the year, it's like over a year, right? Like 365 days in a year. So like you could literally just watch one Pure Hustle Podcast episode every day, and it would take you more than a year to get through. And that's not counting any of the lives that we do on YouTube or all the bonus episodes that we've had. So it's pretty impressive that we're still doing this. But what we want to do today, since this is one of our themed episodes, is we want to kind of go back to the basics, but also stretch it a little bit. And that is sourcing, right? Like all of us, whether you've been reselling for a few days or you've been reselling forever, the key and the big component is what you're sourcing, how you're sourcing, where you're sourcing. Are you able to get things to sell? And in fact, this is like the number one thing. Like when you talk to somebody and you tell them you're a reseller and what you do, that's one of the first questions you get is like, what do you sell and how do you get it? And so we're going to be kind of covering those things and some of the tips and tricks that we use while we're outsourcing, where we're sourcing, what kinds of things, and just not necessarily like this is the item to go source, but kind of some mindsets and some ways of thinking so that when you're sourcing, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, and to me, sourcing is the most valuable skill of them all. Like all the other stuff is monotony. Like it's like robot stuff, right? It's stuff that eventually I think AI will be able to take care of. At a certain point, it's already doing some of that. But, I think of all the resellers out there right now, like the big thing right now is, big creators are selling wholesale, right? So they've kind of stopped the sourcing, right? They do source, but they just source in bulk, right? And then they sell that bulk to other resellers. That's the big thing right now. The other big thing is doing a lot of live selling on Whatnot and one day eBay, whenever eBay opens that up to all of us. But that also hasn't been like sourcing. It's people buying in bulk. And since, they buy it for so cheap, there's not a loss, right? It doesn't cost them a ton of money. Like if they get it for a few cents and they flip it for $5, they're making good money. And so the reason I thought that it would be important is because I do think if you want to have a sustainable reselling business, something that ebbs and flows, something that whether you're part-time or full-time, whatever it is, you're still able to keep that business no matter where you move to, no matter whether you decide to scale down to maybe 500 items or you decide, hey, I'm going to go 10,000 items. I do think it's something that is sustainable if you're able to source. And that is a big thing. And the first thing here is this whole idea that you need to be intentional about sourcing, right? Mike, do you remember the early days? At least I remember before even the podcast, I would go out with my buddies and we'd go to garage sales. And there was no intentionality. It was like, I think there's something over here. Let's go see if there's anything good, right? And it was just kind of like you spend hours and maybe you find a couple items, right? Or you go a random thrift store. You're like, maybe I'll find something, right? There's nothing like intentional. It's not like, hey, I'm hoping to get out of here with 20 items. I'm looking for these items. This is my threshold for profit. Like to me, there needs to be some kind of intentionality, especially if you want to grow the business, or else you end up just kind of, you're at the whim of whatever is available. But there's a way to source that you can consistently get goods all the time that sell for good money. And you can get it at the scale that you want. If you want only, a few hundred in your store, you can source that way. If you want to end up scaling up to 10,000 items, you can source that way. But the key thing is being intentional. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you give like a practical example of what you mean by be intentional? Like if I'm just starting out, I'm going to some garage sales. What should I be doing?
Well, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but like garage sales, okay, that's the easiest one. A non-intentional reseller just goes, I think there's some garage sales on Saturday, and you get up and you're like, I'm gonna get up whenever I'm gonna get up, like as soon as the sunlight hits my eyes or whatever, and like you get up around 8:30, and then you're like, I think I saw some signs down the road. And I think I'm going to go to those garage sales first, right? To me, there's no intentionality. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what time you're going. You don't know what you're going to source, right? The intentional component would have been night before, going on whatever platform, Facebook Marketplace, going on to, Craigslist, going on to whatever is available to you, and looking up all the garage sales on the next day, right? And not only are you looking up those garage sales, you're intentionally looking for certain items, right? So you may either use keywords to look for those items, or you may be looking for a certain genre. Maybe you want vintage stuff. Maybe you want toys. Maybe you want video games. Or the other intentionality could be, hey, I want to be the most effective as possible in the time that I have. And so I'm all about like making sure that I'm efficient in my travel times, right? So you plan a route where you're going to go, right? Yeah. Intentionality is like, hey, I'm going to have a certain amount of 1s and 5s and 20s so people don't have to look for change so I can move faster. Intentionality would be, my goal is I'm going to keep sourcing until I get 20 items or 30 items or 40 items or 50 items. Or maybe you make it until I get enough items to make $100 net profit, $200 net profit, $500, whatever it is. That's intentional, right? And I think that kind of changes as somebody starts off reselling. It's kind of like the brand new person that's kind of like, let's see what there is. And then you can become kind of a hobbyist, right? You begin to know where to go or not to go, you know what to source and what not to source. And then you become, I hate using the word professional. I don't know if professional is the right word, but you're serious about reselling, right? This is now money making. Yeah, more experienced.
Yeah, and kind of going on that idea of gaining experience, the next point that we have here on our list is going to thrift stores. Now, obviously, garage sales oftentimes are going to be your best bang for your buck ROI, just simply because you can get things for pennies on the dollar. And a lot of times people are literally trying to get rid of things. And oftentimes those things are better. I remember, I'll never forget being at a thrift store with a buddy of mine, and I was trying to teach him reselling. And we had like a cart full of some like electronics and things. And a lady in line behind says, are you guys trying to resell that stuff on eBay? And it was like kind of awkward. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, you should probably just go to garage sales because people donate their junk to thrift stores. But if it's at a garage sale, they actually think it's worth something. And, there's definitely some truth to that. But a lot of times, you still end up getting good things at thrift stores. Now, what I would say is one of the best benefits of a thrift store, if you're limited to just garage sales, it's maybe 1 or 2 days a week that you're able to get out to those. And a lot of times that's weekends. And so if you're already working a full 9-to-5 job, Monday through Friday, that's like Saturday is the only time you can really get out because Sunday garage sales, it's usually just scraps and leftovers. If you've got anything else planned that week, like, oh, my kid's got a soccer game, well, it looks like I'm missing out on sourcing for a whole week and you're just going to fall behind on your business. Whereas the benefit of a thrift store is there's always a thrift store open, somewhere pretty close. And there's usually several of them. So it could be, a Tuesday afternoon, you got a long lunch, you could stop in at a thrift store. So you have more opportunities to gain experience and to potentially find those hot items. The other benefit of a thrift store, and this is where I think is probably the biggest benefit, is I think back to when I was a brand new reseller. And even now as an experienced reseller, if you want to learn what sells and what doesn't sell, go spend hours in a thrift store, just looking items up, because part of it is an education. I mean, I think of how much money people spend and time people spend to go get a degree. They go to college, they get a degree, and depending on the field you're going in, that may be the right route to take. But you're spending hours in class, hours at home reading, and you're paying money to do that. Now, you can go to a thrift store for free and say, I'm going to spend the next 3 hours and pretend like this is a college level class. This is reselling, 201. This is a little bit upper level. And I'm just going to go through the entire electronics section and I'm going to look up every item because I'm not familiar with electronics. And you're going to see things and you're going to look things up and you're going to find, oh, this is not worthwhile. This is not worthwhile. Oh, this is interesting, but maybe it's overpriced. And after you do that a handful of times, you're going to start recognizing items. Oh, I've already looked up a bunch of those. Those aren't worth it. But I haven't seen one of these yet. And I've been into the electronics section of thrift stores for the last couple of weeks. This is new. Let's look this up. And so you start to develop an eye for what's unique, what's interesting, what sells, and you learn the brands. Like one of the things that's really hard is a lot of times new resellers want to know like which clothing brand should I buy, and they just want to watch a 10-minute YouTube video that gives you these clothing brands, and that can be a very useful way of kind of spotting some of the popular ones, some of the ones that might be useful. We've even talked in a previous episode. We used AI to show us some potential bolos, how you could use AI to find bolos, but it's not going to catch everything. There are tens of thousands of brands. And so if a YouTube channel show focuses on the top 10 brands that sell, well, there's a whole lot of other niche brands that weren't mentioned that you are maybe only going to see once every month at a thrift store, but that could be where a lot of money is. And so you're only going to find out about those brands if you're digging through the racks, if you're looking up brands. And it takes a lot of time in the beginning, but the longer you do that, I say you kind of go in purposefully ignorant. And a lot of times some of the best profit that you can make is because you're going, you know what? I don't know anything about this. I'm going to look it all up. Because if you go in thinking, oh, I know clothes, and you're just looking for 5 brands and that's all you're looking for, you could be skipping on a lot of good stuff. And so thrift stores are a great opportunity to learn, to gain experience, and to kind of experiment in some other fields that you might not be familiar with, because you're not limited to, well, I've got Saturday morning from 7 a.m. to like 9 a.m. and then that's it. You've got a whole lot more flexibility and freedom of when you can go do your reseller education that not only are you not paying for, but is potentially paying you.
Yeah, and I just want to add a couple of things to that. You know, a lot of people talk about using Terapeak and checking out trends and what sells at certain times. I think that's more like advanced, like when you're later on, like you pretty much know what to pick up, and you can kind of do that depending on what you're selling. But I'll never forget that show Thrift Hunters back on A&E, like, I don't know, it was a decade ago or whatever. And Jason Smith, one of the resellers that were on there, yeah, I remember there was an episode and he was talking about like he doesn't leave a thrift store without touching over 1,000 items in the store, right? And I think about like how much experience you're able to gain like on a good 2, 3, maybe even 4-hour visit to a thrift store. And it is a little miserable in the beginning, because in the beginning, I would say most of the stuff you're searching, it has no value. And you keep saying, what am I like? I think of it like, if you, let's say you try to do like shirts, right? Just Hawaiian shirts or button down shirts, like the amount of trash you would go through until you finally found the shirt, especially depending on what thrift store you went to. If you went to a Goodwill, the store that shall not be named, that would be probably the most difficult place to go because they're already picked over, right? They already send out their best stuff to Shop Goodwill. Salvation Army does some of the online, so that might be difficult. But if you go to a thrift store like a red, white, and blue store, or one that's bigger, but it's not a chain one, like you probably will have some good success of finding items. But yeah, like Mike said, like it's free in the sense that you're not paying for it. You are spending time, but there is so much to learn. And what happens as you begin to source, you begin to develop like your own pattern. Like you like starting at shoes, or you like starting at toys or at clothing, and eventually over time, or you're able to go in a thrift store and you could spend maybe 30 minutes, you can comb that store and you know what you need. And then if, let's say you want to branch out, you want to go to garage sales, you want to start doing estate sales, those items that you found in that thrift store will begin to show up like at these other places, right? Where before you never even noticed these things, right? I can't tell you how many times, you know, in the early days, I remember my buddy who just used to go to garage selling for the sake of garage selling would be like, "Hey, Rolando, did you find anything?" I'm like, "Nope." Like, yeah, it's pretty bad these weeks. And it would go on for weeks like that, where we would always call each other and be like, "Yep, it's pretty bad out there. There's nothing." Now it's a rarity. Like if I go to a thrift store, I go to garage sale, it is very rare that I will not find something. Doesn't mean I will find a lot, but at least I'll find some items. So part of that is being consistent. And this applies to both, because I think there's patterns when it comes to sourcing at a thrift store or sourcing at garage sales. I would say even when you're thrifting wholesale, when you're doing pallets, like the more consistent you are in studying, right? And studying when things go on sale, when studying when certain inventory comes in, when studying, you know, when are there resellers, when are not resellers, when certain racks come out. I know for like garage sales here in San Diego, like the pattern usually is like you need to be at garage sales at least 45 minutes before they open. Like if you really want to get good stuff, like it could say starts at 7 a.m., you got to be there at 6:15. Right. And it's just the way it is out here. Like if it's at 6 a.m., you got to be there at 5:15. Right. That is a pattern here. And usually the pattern is by like 8:30, 8:45, like things get kind of sketchy. Like there's not saying there aren't good garage sales after. I've had some great scores, but that's how it is. I know here at thrift stores, for example, whenever there's a for sale tags on items, which rarely happens, but certain thrift stores do have like those 50% discounts. Usually the items that are 50% discount are items that they weren't able to sell. And you probably want to source for the full price items because that's where the quality stuff is. Right. So you want to be consistent so you know what is the best time of day, whether it be garage sales or it be thrift stores. When it comes to wholesaling, you can begin to figure out, all right, when is the quality stuff comes in? Like you have rag houses out here, and depending when they get certain imports from certain countries, is when the good stuff is there. And some people just show up and they spend hours combing through those bins instead of just recognizing, hey, the beginning of the month is maybe the best, or midweek or whatever it is. you need to be consistent, because as you are consistent, you're able to see the patterns and you're able to source better.
Yep.
Now, the other item I wanted to add though with the consistency is, and this kind of will tie
taxes.
Yeah, I know.
You got to be consistent with your taxes. It's huge.
And so the reason we bring that up is it's almost tax time, right? April 15, right? I don't know when the last time I did my taxes on April 15, but it is coming up. And so don't be like Orlando, get your taxes done on time. And the best way to get that done, I think, as a reseller is by having bookkeeping software, which will help you. And that is My Reseller Genie, software made by resellers for resellers. If you use our code Pure Hustle, you'll get 15% off the first month. Again, that's our code Pure Hustle. You get 15% off the first month. And it allows you to import all your items from eBay, your shipping costs, your promoted listings, all those items. And you could also check your profit and loss. And by the way, there's other tools that you can use. For example, if maybe you're trying to get a loan, right? And you know, you don't have a W-2, right? You might have a 1099, and people also want to look at a profit and loss. You can pull a P&L from My Reseller Genie, which I've done before, and you're able to use that as evidence of how much, you know, you're able to pay for items. I know for right now, like I'm trying to find a place to stay in the Bay Area as I'm moving. And I got to pull all stops, right? Because I don't have a regular W-2 for like the last 7 years, right? So I have to prove to them that I make a certain amount of income. And so part of that is having bookkeeping software that helps me. So check out My Reseller Genie.
Yeah.
All right.
So our next one here, and we already kind of talked about this, touched on it a little bit, is this idea when you were mentioning intentionality, being intentional about how you're planning. And I'm really huge on, you need to have a plan. You got to plan ahead. But it goes beyond simple things. Like, you know, we say simple because we've been doing this so long, but things like having a route, making sure you got gas in your car, making sure you have the right denominations of bills. Those things, you know, those are simple surface level things that make a huge difference, but planning also involves a lot of other things as well. So some of the ways you can plan is, if you know that you tend to source a lot of electronics, bring some batteries, right? Bring some AA's, some AAA's, bring a 9-volt, right? Because a lot of, you know, if you're looking at some vintage electronics, you might need to test something. And if you don't have the batteries and they don't have the batteries there, you aren't going to be able to determine whether or not something works. So things like batteries can be really important. There's other ways you can plan ahead as well, as far as, and you kind of touched on this with the intentionality, but is even just having goals and tracking what it is you're picking up. Hey, when I go to this neighborhood, I tend to pick up these types of items. So I'm going to know in the future when I'm going here, maybe I need to brush up on, you know, vintage clothing, because this neighborhood sale every year tends to have a lot of that. So let me spend a little bit of time kind of prepping for that, preparing for that, or even having goals set in place. Like you said, I want to pick up X number of items. And so having those kind of plans ahead, even planning ahead as far as knowing your negotiation strategies and tips. You know, I think of things like us reading Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and the YouTube video that we made on that. I think it was like a 2 or 3 part series on how to, use these negotiation tips. Part of that is planning ahead as well. Like, do I know what I'm going to say when I walk up? Do I know how I'm going to negotiate for things? And having those things before you ever leave the house is going to make a huge difference. I think it was Tim the Slim, when we had him on the podcast, made the comment that he believes that whatever is tracked is improved, you know, that works as an educator. And the same thing I think is true in any business, right? Like, if you're not tracking things, if you're not keeping metrics, that's, you know, going back to what you were saying with taxes, My Reseller Genie, when you're tracking your expenses, you're tracking those things, you're going to improve. And I think the same is true for your planning process. If you're not taking some time to reflect and see, you know, how much money, you know, it's not simple, just as simple as, hey, I need to make sure I've got 1s, 5s, and 10s, but on a regular day, when I go to a garage sale on Saturdays, I'm spending about $250. So do I have that much money? Do I have more than that, just in case I come across something that's a little bit better? So kind of tracking your previous experiences and data, and then using that as part of your planning methodology going forward is going to allow you to be more profitable.
Yeah, I can tell you, like, you need to be ready to go. One of the biggest things I would say, if you're doing bulk buys, right? you do not want to come unprepared. Like you want to have your car ready to go. You want to, you want to get a bigger vehicle. You want to have boxes. You want to have bubble wrap. You want to have whatever. The reason being is I've had bulk buys where like they were like, oh, I don't know about this. If you're able to take it all right now, I'm willing to do the deal, right? Or you don't want to give people 24 hours to kind of reconsider and go, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this, right? That's one way to plan ahead. We talked about making routes for garage sales, but make sure that you, again, I would say it's all about planning. It's about being intentional, right? Whatever that planning looks like, because in the end, you're going to end up doing better. I can't tell you how many times I showed up to a place and I was only going to source like maybe one or two items, right? I was going to source, just, I don't know, maybe a couple totes full of stuff. And next thing you know, I'm like, hey, do you have any other stuff? And they're like, you know what? I have this whole thing, but I don't know if you're able to take care of all of this today. And I'm like, yeah, I can. My whole car is empty. Whatever you want to show me, like, let's make a deal. Let's make it right now, right? Because you want to be very effective. And if you don't plan ahead, I would say every Facebook marketplace, every OfferUp, every Craigslist deal, I always make sure my car is empty, because you just never know. I can't tell you how many times I go in and I'm there for just like one set of items and I begin to fill up the entire car because they're like, you know what, since you're here, let me show you some other stuff. And you begin to able to source a lot of stuff at one time. All right, so this is one. I give credit to Pete, Craigslist Hunter, for this one, because I thought this was one of the most valuable tips he gave us in our first ever Puros podcast interview. How long was that? 2021, maybe? I don't even know when that was. 2020, like 2019. It might have been 2019. I don't even know. So do you realize at one point Puros podcast will be older than any children we may have had after 2018? That is pretty wild. Like, Puros podcast is older than both of your kids, two of your kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is just wild to me. All right. What he said is, hey, be good at 2 or 3 niches, right? 2 different genres, categories, areas. And I think that's super valuable. Mike and I are everything sellers, but I think if you really were to look at our inventory, we kind of have like a lot of the same kind of things that we continually source, right? Because we feel comfortable. We know that area. We know what's good in that area. I mean, we can source that stuff without even having to do a ton of research. Like, we know right off the bat, like, what is valuable, what is not valuable, right? So for me, a lot of it is baseball bats. A lot of it is baseball gloves, a lot of vintage baseball apparel, stuff like that, like all day long. I don't even have to research. I already know things that are worth money. A lot of vintage toys. I already know things that are worth money. But that allows you to have that knowledge to go into a place, whether it be a thrift store, whether it be a garage sale, whether it be an estate or a bulk buy, to come in and the areas that people are noticing, you're able to gain that advantage and you're able to source those items. And I would say experiment a little bit. Don't experiment all the time, because that can consume you, right? You may end up missing out on a lot of good items, but I think it's good to experiment every once in a while.
I mean, I say again, like if you're intentional about it, it's a really good thing to do. If you say, hey, I'm going to learn 2 new niches a year, one the first half of the year and another one the second half of the year, or maybe you've got enough time that you can do one a quarter, right? So you're going to dedicate the next 3 months or 6 months, depending on how you've set your schedule up. I'm going to learn about cast iron pans, or I'm going to learn about pottery. And you spend the time learning about that and experimenting with that. But knowing that you have your 3 or 4 or 5 that you can fall back on, like, hey, I really, really know, toys, or I really know board games. And so that's my go-to, that's my bread and butter, but I'm experimenting and learning about pottery, or I'm learning about cookware, whatever it is you're going to want to learn about. And, going back to the episode we had previously about keeping the costs low, if you're doing that, it allows you to really experiment with some stuff. But yeah, if every time you go into something, you're like, you know what, I'm going to try and learn 20 new things today, you're going to have a knowledge that's an inch deep and a mile wide, and it's just not going to be profitable. Whereas over the course of 5 years, if you learn even one new niche, like you really become, pretty competent in a new niche every year, you're going to be in a really good place 4 or 5 years from now. So, maybe it's this year, like I'm going to learn Hot Wheels. Like that was your thing a couple years ago. You really got into Hot Wheels, and now you know that niche. And now it's only going to take you a few minutes to maybe brush up if there's some cars you haven't noticed before, or years or models, but you've already done that work. And so you're good to go on that. And so a lot of times people want to do everything all at once. And it's much better to say, hey, I know golf clubs, so I'm sticking to golf clubs, but this year I'm going to try and learn one other thing or two other things. And over the course of time, it compounds. And before you know it, you know 10 areas really, really well.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, it's great. I mean, once you get to that place, but it's hard. It takes work. It does take a lot of work. But this is why I tell people, like, focus on certain niches, because once you're really good at those niches, like the stuff you'll be able to source. Like, I'll never talk about Hot Wheels. I'll never forget one of my greatest scores on Hot Wheels. It wasn't the storage unit. It was a family of mine that I teach. Their grandparents they want to get rid of a bunch of stuff, and they had a small cardboard box. And I was like, what's in there? He's like, oh, they're just Hot Wheels from when I grew up. I was like, oh, when you grew up? Like, okay, that must be like 1960s, right? All I had to do was open a little bit of the box, peek inside, see the red lines, and go, okay, this is it. Like, if I just walk away with this box, I am golden. And sure enough, like, I want to say $1 or $2 grand on just that box of Hot Wheels, right? So yes, learning, because for example, Hot Wheel red lines, they're pretty easy to spot, but if you don't know, you don't know, right? You look at a bunch of cars in a bag, and you're like, oh, this is junk, but there could be that one Hot Wheel in there that's worth a ton of money. So make sure to focus on those niches, but be willing to experiment. All right, hey, before we continue moving forward and talking about more about not just how to source, but our incredible hustle of the week, just want to invite you guys all to follow us on social media. We are Pure Hustle Podcast on all platforms, and we are Pure Hustle Cast on X. As always, you're welcome to shoot us an email at purehustlepodcast@gmail.com. That's purehustlepodcast@gmail.com. And if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, or you've been listening for a while, I invite you to come on over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and click that bell notification. We've been at like 9190 on YouTube. And listen, if everybody at one time just subscribed, we for sure would hit that. We'd be in we'd be maybe 20, 30,000, maybe even more. But I would love to just get over 10,000. So would appreciate if you do that for us. And always grateful for all of you that leave us iTunes reviews. If you haven't yet, come on over, tell people why you listen to the podcast, give us that 5 stars, and let us know, why you enjoy the podcast. So again, go to iTunes, leave that review and that 5-star. And thank you for all of you for continuing to support us. One of the reasons we're always able to push free content without charging anybody is because of all of our loyal Patreon subscribers. It's only $5.55 a month, probably the best deal out there for any reselling Discord. And we haven't changed the price yet. So if you'd like to come on over, go on the Discord. Even today, I was on there and I was learning all this stuff. All of our hustles of the week today are from the Discord. And that's only the tip of the iceberg of the information that's on there. So come on over, go to patreon.com/purehustlepodcast, or go to our link below and just sign up for $5.55 a month. So check us out on Patreon, which will give you access to our Discord. Yeah. All right, are we ready to talk about some hustles of the week?
Yeah. Come on, hustlers. It's the freaking hustle of the week. All right, our first hustle of the week comes from Hey Ale from the Discord.
_Ale.
So a couple of weeks ago, someone posted in a local Facebook group free stuff on the side of the road right down the street from my house. I popped in my car and drove over, wondering if it was all still there, since I swear people refresh and go grab items as soon as they go up. The items were still there, and I happily picked up this dinner set with 8 place settings, 4 cups. Love the pattern, and after looking up, found it's a 1970 Franciscan floral earthenware set. Listed it on Marketplace for $140 last weekend and sold it yesterday to a woman in the next town over. She also was asking if I have anything else with this vibe. So let's see if more sales from this connection. Fantastic pickup. I mean, from free 50 free to $140. You can't beat that.
It's great from Facebook to Facebook. Right? Yeah. Like that's fantastic. I always love those local deals. So nice work there. Hey Ale. All right, this next one, comes from, so this is from somebody, I got to get their name on the Discord. Let me jump on over. But Mike, what is the first thing that we talked about that kind of like set us in motion of reselling on the podcast? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't the first thing, but it was one of the first things, and that was duck decoys, right? Because I picked one up at a garage sale, and you thought I was crazy, but I had heard about them with a conversation at a lunch table. I was at a lunch table, and someone was like, "Yeah, my father has a bunch of duck decoys," and I started collecting them, and I didn't even know what they were, and then I started looking them up then, even before I got into reselling, and so yeah, it's definitely one of the items that we're kind of known for is the duck decoys.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable on duck decoys. Like I'm not anywhere close to an expert. Like right now, I still have, I don't know, 60 duck decoys. Some of them I listed at obscene prices because I couldn't find anything as far as comparisons. And I get messages all the time like, this is actually from the 1965 model that came through and yours is missing this component. I'm like, wow, like, how do you know that? Like, how do you know that? So this is a great find here. This comes from dogpatch_picker from the Discord. It says, got this set of decoys at an antique store liquidation ran by a local estate sale company. Originally priced at $25. I got on the second day of the sale as part of a big lot of stuff. I put it together. I'm calling it $17 purchase price. The company's regular brown goose decoys range from $80 to $100 for a set. However, consulting the product research tab, I found the white snow goose ones have sold for $200 plus and are much less common. So 12 vintage Johnson's snow goose decoys, complete sets with ground stakes and canvas bag. I priced these high and they sat for about 2 months until an interested buyer came along and they sold for $201 plus ship. They're headed to the UK. A good reminder to opt into international shipping. The great news is I bought 2 sets that day.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, so this is a different type of duck decoy than we've been talking about. Like there's the decorative duck decoys that like the wood ones people put in their houses, and then there's like hunting ones. So these are legit hunting duck decoys. So there's money on both ends of it. You know, it's not just the decorative pieces, and it's not just the hunting pieces. If you get the right stuff, there's money in both directions.
Yeah, it's. I got to tell you, duck decoy. Now you got to be careful. Like I said, I ended up paying $500 for a bunch of duck decoys. I made $2 to $3K already. But you know, make sure there's markings. I would say if you're brand new, make sure there's markings. But again, like we said, if that's one of those niches you decide to investigate and study and learn more about, like it's definitely worth your time.
Nice.
All right, Mike. What's our next one here?
Our next one comes from Salad Sauce from the Discord. So he says, I was at my Honey Hole thrift store and they had 3 sets of new old stock, never opened Amway pots and pans. I paid $600 for all 3 sets. Well, so you paid up $200 a set. I sold the first set in a few days for $625 plus ship and just sold another set for $799 plus shipping. I'm listing them one at a time since they're the only ones for sale on the internet. That's a good strategy too, right? If you're the only comp and you got multiple listings, it might be worth just listing him one at a time, unless the only other way you can maybe play that is to list 2 of them and put one really, really high so your lower listing looks like a better deal. And then drop the price of the other one once one sells. So that is maybe a potential way of kind of hacking that. But otherwise, yeah, being the only listing for an item is a surefire way of getting top dollar. So fantastic. Man, pots and pans. And
I remember when they first were like, oh, I paid $600. I was like, ooh, like that, you're paying up. Like $600, you're taking a risk. But hey, if the comps were there and they already made a killing, they already made $700 just profit. They sell one more, they can make another $700. So can't go wrong, right? And again, understanding like certain items gives you that ability to make more money. All right, Mike, what is your hustle of the week?
So my hustle of the week, it's interesting. I had a couple of like CCTV lenses or CCT. Is that the right term?
CCTV? Is that like when security cameras?
Security cameras, yeah. So I know not a lot. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I know photography lenses and videography lenses pretty okay. It's a niche I'm decent in. And I recognized a brand, Tamron, which they make quality stuff, but it's kind of like tend to be like slightly below like the highest level of things. So like Tamron, it's almost like they make, one way of looking at it is like kind of like the knockoffs of the highest ends, but their quality is still really good. So it's like a good like middle level lens for a lot of different cameras. And so I had one of these for a CCTV like security camera. I actually had two. They're slightly different. But I knew based off of the markings on it, as far as like its aperture ratings and everything, that it was a very fast lens. It was a high quality lens. It was very sharp. And so I've had them on eBay for a while, and they just haven't moved. I had a few questions on some of them. But I ended up posting one of them just to test it out. I was posting stuff on Facebook Marketplace, and it sat for 3 weeks on Facebook Marketplace, and then it sold for full asking price at $60, which is just wild to me that something has been sitting on eBay and hasn't gotten movement, but it did get movement on Facebook Marketplace, which just goes to show, even though eBay definitely reaches a broader audience, it doesn't mean you're reaching the audience you're looking for. Right. So it's still worthwhile cross-posting to other sites, other, methods of trying to sell, because again, we talk about finding that right buyer. Well, if that right buyer is not on eBay, then it's worthwhile being on some other platforms as well.
Yeah, no, and this is why we push Vendu. Like Vendu does a great job of cross-posting. Use our code Pure Hustle. You get a nice discount because you never know, right? You just got to get more eyes on stuff. So,
and I don't think I mentioned my purchase price on that when I mentioned I sold it for like $60. I honestly don't remember. It couldn't have been more than $5. I picked up some security equipment, some cameras and lenses and things at a garage sale, and I bought a whole bunch of it at one time for a pretty decent price. And so I would say probably $2 to $5 for that lens. So nice, not a bad. And local sales, you're not dealing with all the fees.
So mine isn't a huge hustle of the week, but I like it because it's the gift that keeps on giving. So a year ago, I ended up being given like a little like basket full of like pins. So I had like old political pins that had all kinds of randomness. And I remember that just sat in my garage for like 6 months, and I never took a look at it because it was given to me for free. So I'm like, there must not be much value. Well, I pulled them out and I found some old Vietnam era protest pins, and I sold some of them for like 130, 120, sold some for 80, sold some for 150. And I just always go back to it every once in a while because I'm like, what other treasures are here? Then I found this like 1960s, I only know it's 1960s because I did the research, an enamel Greenpeace Dove brooch. Is it called brooch, right? Brooch. Yep. And it's tiny. I mean, it's literally like probably like the size of the top of my thumb, and it's easy to miss. And I was like, I wonder if this is worth any money. So sure enough, I did the Google image search, and it matched what others sold in the past, and it sold today for $70 plus ship. And I'm like, wow, like how easy would it have been for me to just like been like, oh, this is probably all junk. They just give this to me for free. But luckily I went through it, and there's a lot of good stuff. There was a lot of junk. I would say a lot of the political pins aren't worth a lot of money. Like I got tons of pins I even got stuff from like Eisenhower and Kennedy and Nixon. You would think they're worth money, but they're so mass produced that they're not worth much, right? There's certain ones, but yeah, this brooch was good, and it's easy to ship. And, it's one of those things. Whenever you do a bulk buy, go through everything, right? Because you just never know what treasures are being hidden. I would say even these people probably didn't even think twice about it. They probably, they hadn't looked at it in a long time. And by the time I could have ever reached out to them and said, hey, I don't know about these items you gave me, like they had moved and I could never locate them again. So you just never know. All right, let's get back to talking about a little sourcing. Okay. And this is one where I like to talk about this a lot, just because YouTube kind of, it sells you a dream. I mean, that's the goal, right? Mike and I don't think are selling you a dream on the podcast. But sometimes you watch resellers and they're like, hey, these are the top 10 items to look out for, right? And we do bolos too. But you always got to remember that it's based on what your geography, right? So, for example, when I go to Wisconsin and I visit friends, I'm not going to find rain spoon or Hawaiian shirts. It's just, I've actually tried, and it's like impossible. Right. So don't go looking for items that like you saw somebody, in another part of the country that's not even close to where you're at. Like, you may have other valuable items that they never have access to ever. So, for example, Dixon flannels, they're not as hot as they used to be, but there was a time that you could sell them for good money. There's still some that are good money, but certain parts of the country, you're not going to find them. You're not going to find Dixon flannels in Miami. You will find them in East County, San Diego, because that's kind of like the culture, right? That's what people wear is flannels out here, right? And so you got to find what works with your geography. Sometimes, video games, they transcend geography, right? There's other items that transcend geography, but you got to source according to what is available in your area. So don't always try to find whatever is on YouTube, whatever you look, because you may find your own thing that no one else is able to find. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's really good. I mean, I'm in Texas now, so obviously the items have changed a little bit from Southern California. So knowing your geography. Over there? I haven't done a ton of research. I mean, yeah, belt buckles are definitely more plentiful here. Okay. But also I think the other side of the coin is people know a little bit more about what they have. And so it's not necessarily, it might be a huge market for me. I should look into it some, but, all right. The next one is, and I actually made a whole, YouTube video on this, on how to save searches on Facebook Marketplace, on the, not the app, but the Chrome version, or like the web browser version, and ways of kind of saving some bookmarks so you can quickly pull up. But pretty much every app has some save searches. So if you're on, eBay, and there's some niches a lot about, maybe you're into comic books or you're into trading cards, you can set those as save searches, specific versions or editions, or one specific item you're looking for, and you can set save searches on eBay. You can do it somewhat on Facebook Marketplace. You can do it on OfferUp. You can do it there's ways to have save searches, Craigslist. And by doing that, you can get into a rhythm and a routine where it's like, hey, some of these things are going to give me alerts, but I found a lot of times alerts came too late. If I was relying on, hey, I'm waiting for an alert because I'm going to try and snipe an item. But a lot of times I was looking for things that weren't necessarily going quickly. And so it was just part of a routine. Like, hey, in the morning when I get up, once I eat my breakfast, I'm going to go through my save searches. It takes me 5 to 10 minutes to go through all my platforms, my save searches, and you can tend to find one or two items, maybe nothing that time you search, and then maybe do the same thing at lunch and the same thing in the evening. So you're looking at maybe 20 minutes a day of just scrolling through your save searches. And again, alerts can be very helpful, but sometimes it's annoying to be getting alerts all the time for items. It's like, well, nope, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm looking for. So it's having some saved searches in the niches that it's going to save you a ton of time. And definitely check out the video that I made. Just type in Pure Hustle Podcast, Facebook Marketplace searches, and you'll find that video, because I give some practical tips and tricks, even for things like looking for garage sales at a specific time or place.
All right, now this next one, some people may not like this next one, but it's the reality of reselling, and it's gaining that unfair advantage, right? Getting yourself ahead of the crowd, right? And there's many ways you can do this. So give you some examples here. Garage sales, right? If you want to search garage sales and you see items that are good, stop by their house the day before. Give them a phone call. Right, source those items before anybody shows up. Right, I know a lot of resellers do that already, but if you've ever thought about that, that's sometimes what people do. I do it sometimes too. Like if it's something really, really good, I'll call them up the night before, 2 days before. I'll say, hey, are you willing to let me buy out your garage, right, or your garage sale? Like I might buy a lot of junk, but I'm there to get the real good items, right? And some people are willing to do that, right? Another way, and I know people in San Diego that do this, is you develop such a good relationship with that thrift store. You tell them, hey, if you get any of this item, if you could set those aside, I will buy those for you every single time. I will buy them even at maybe 25% more of, what you may charge in the store. Now, you got to be careful with that, right? Because obviously you get taken advantage of. But, I had a great relationship with one store back in the day where I was in that store every day. And I developed such a great friendship that whenever good stuff would come in, they would call me and I would drop everything I'm doing and I would just go to the back of the store and I would just source it like right there. And it was a super unfair advantage. Like, I don't know if anybody that had the opportunity. I had a good year of that and it was incredible. I mean, I remember picking up like 12 Swatch watches from like the 90s for like $8 and flipping them for like over $1,000. I remember picking up, all kinds of Harley Davidson stuff when it was hot. Like it was great. And it was an unfair advantage, right? Because other resellers were coming in through the front door trying to see what there was. And I was already picking stuff before it ever hit the sales floor, right? You can sometimes, you can go to certain businesses, right? I'm giving all the secrets here, right? So for example, you can contact schools in your area, right? If you want to do the whole dual deck VCR DVD, and you could just leave your card and say, hey, if you're ever remodeling or if you ever have old electronics that you want to get rid of, or maybe, you want a little bit of money to kind of for a certain fund, like you can leave your business card at a certain school and they will contact you. I mean, one of my biggest scores was, back when I was an administrator, there was a school that was shutting down and the school was like, hey, come on over, take whatever you want. And everybody that, worked at the school knew I was a reseller, and they're like, hey, you can have all the DVD, VCR combos you want. And I walked away with 30 of them, which was crazy. This is back when they were selling for like, 100 to 200 a piece, right? So look for that unfair advantage. Sometimes it just takes doing a lot of cold calls, getting people thinking you're crazy on the phone and hanging up on you. But there's a lot of opportunity out there to gain an advantage to goods before anybody else gets to it. So do that, make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of goes too with the idea, our next point, which is networking. And you mentioned some of the unfair advantage is having those connections, right? Developing those relationships, having those connections. And it's such an overlooked part of reselling for a lot of people. I mean, I can't tell you, probably I would say the number one thing that we get whenever it comes up in a conversation, on the podcast, comments on, and then people bring up in the Discord is business cards, right? Whenever we talk about business cards, people want to see examples of business cards. People give examples of business cards. People ask how to utilize them. And things like that can be so powerful because, like you said, if you're at a thrift store, you're at a garage sale, hey, somebody had some stuff that you were interested in, maybe you bought some of it, and you leave your business card, you can oftentimes make those connections where people are reaching back out to you. I mean, years ago, I gave my example of, I was going after board games, and I made a connection that I think ended up being a little bit shady, and so I ended up cutting that connection off, and it was like a bizarre story of like meeting some guy in a parking lot, and the prices I was getting were so unbelievable, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to keep up with this specific connection that I have. Seems maybe not so great, but making those connections can be such a powerful tool. And I'm thinking, like, even for me, like how those connections can move beyond. Right now with my school that I'm working at, I want to, like, one of my passion projects is trying to get more books into kids' hands, and that books that they can take home and keep, not just go to a library, check out a book, and then have to bring it back, but books that they can actually keep in their at home. And so part of me is like, look, I've already got some connections with some thrift stores and with some, other groups within the community. If I'm leaving business cards that aren't just my reselling business card, or even if it is that one, and say, hey, I also have this thing I'm trying to do, can I, if you have young adult fiction books or anything that, high schoolers might be interested in, let me know, if you'd be willing to like lot them up and give me a good price on these, because I want to get these into hands of kids. Well, that opportunity came from me being a reseller and already having connections with these thrift stores and with these places like the Goodwill bins. And then it can also open up more if they're like, hey, we have these books, but we also have some that the high schoolers might not be interested in. I can then still take those books, sell them, and use that money to buy the books that the kids, could use for taking home and wanting to read. And so to think of like those kinds of opportunities only open up when you're willing to make those connections and networking. And it goes beyond just that networking at that level of, hey, I'm a reseller, you're a thrift store owner, to even within reselling community, right? Like, hey, I've met so many people on the Discord. Like right now, I know for a fact if I run across anything golf related, I know who to contact, right? Because on our Discord, we got our golf guy and he knows golf clubs and he's my contact for that. And so we've built a network of people that you can reach out to with questions. I mean, there's a lot of times I'll send you, Orlando, like a text message with like, hey, here's this item I'm looking at. Is this any good? Because I know you have experience in that field and I don't. And so those only come from the reseller to reseller networking. And a lot of times, I have no interest in certain items. and I know another reseller sells in that niche, so I contact them, and the same thing happens the other way. They know, hey, I don't really sell this stuff, but here's this guy, I saw this garage sale, you should check this out. And so building those relationships and networking, you know, from reseller to garage sale, like owner, like the homeowner or thrift store owner, all the way to reseller are very, very powerful tools. And that's why things like our Discord is so advantageous as well.
Agreed. And going back to networking, you know, you had mentioned business cards, and you know, I've been reselling for 10 years, and I have shared thousands of business cards over that time. And it gets to a place where in the last, I think since it's been a long time, since maybe early November, I have not sourced, not once. But I get phone calls all the time. I just got a text a few days ago about somebody who had all this like antique vintage stuff, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it, and if I just swing by and make a deal. And so I was able to gain on that opportunity, right? I'm at a place that there's so much info out there, you know, that I get calls, maybe I would say, and without exaggeration, maybe at least once a week, right? And all it takes is like one good phone call that you can source enough. They're good for like a week, 2 weeks. Sometimes you can source so much that you could be good for a month, right? So networking is the best way. And it's also the best way to get that deal, because generally when you network, you end up getting a bulk buy. Right now, you can network also at the thrift store. If you don't feel comfortable doing those big estate bulk buys or from private sellers, you can network with a thrift store, like I've shared before, right? But you got to get out there. You got to get out there. And some people are, you know, okay with just doing eBay to eBay arbitrage, or doing Amazon to eBay arbitrage, or eBay to Amazon, and never talking to a soul. And it's possible you can do it. But I would say, you know, the easiest route is just get out there, be friendly, shake hands with people, give them that business card, and always be available. Like if they ever are like, hey, I don't know about this, just go, you know what? Let me just take a look, right? Don't cut it off before you ever get out there. I've had that before, where somebody's like, hey, Orlando, all they have is Japanese pottery. I don't think this is worth it to you. And I'll go like, no, let me stop by. And next thing you know, I show up and I find that they have a stereo system they want to get rid of. And they have some rugs that are very wealthy, you know, very rich, very, you know, collectible rugs or whatever it could be. Like you always find like these side quests when you go, of other items that weren't necessarily part of the networking conversation. And you're like, what? Like, yeah, I want to buy your closet full of video games. And it's happened before. I can tell you how many times. And again, my biggest scores have never been at a garage sale. They've never been at a thrift store. They've never been from a wholesale. It's always been from a private seller. It's been somebody that at one time had my business card, reached out to me, and I was the only one on the pick, and I was able to get a huge amount of items for a very great price. All right, here. And our last one here is, and this could have been anywhere in the 10 that we just listed, but be an expert in our area. And Mike kind of alluded to this a little bit. So what do I mean by this, right? And you had shared this. So for example, there was a time when I always bought Harley Davidson. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter if it was shirts. It didn't matter if it was pants. It didn't matter if it was memorabilia. And in San Diego, a lot of people knew this, and not saying everybody, there's a lot of resellers I didn't know. But what happened sometimes is people would come across a house and they go, Orlando, it's all Harley stuff, and I know this is what you like. Like, please come over here. It's going to be worth your time. So I became an expert in that area. Right. And so and an expert, not saying like I was the end all know all of things, but people knew me as being the person that always sourced Harley whenever it was available. So the Discord played a large role because I had people in our Discord that knew about this. The podcast played a huge role. And so what ended up happening is I would get these phone calls all the time. Like, hey, I don't buy Harley, but I know you do. Go for it. Right. I don't know much about like these vintage toys here, but I know I've seen you do Instagram videos on it. I've heard you talk about it on the podcast. Like, come and check it out. And so being an expert in a certain area and getting that out there, like people know that you are the person to go to, can bring a lot of good things. One of the people in our Discord is all about golf clubs, right? And I can't wait till the day where I get into somebody's garage or storage unit and it's all these vintage golf clubs. So I can be like, hey, I don't know much about these, but I think this would be worth your while. You should come on over, right? And they'd be able to get huge scores. So one of the best ways I think to source is know a certain area, a certain category really well, really well, and make sure that people know that you know that category really well. And it's going to allow you to take, great scores at minimal prices. Anything more to add to that one, Mike?
No, I think that's good.
All right. So hopefully this episode allowed you to think a lot about how to source. I think we kind of started like at beginner level, right? This is what you should do to get started. And some of these other things where I would say more experienced resellers can talk to, let us know in the comments. Like, do you find that this is kind of the progression of things for you? How do you source? Like, what is your main way of sourcing? Any tips you have for new people or even for people that have been sourcing for a while? And now, as always, great for all of you tuning in. And always make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling.
Peace. Your Hustle Podcast guides our quest, learning tricks to be the best. On eBay we make our name, reselling dreams, winning the game.